Fog clung to the broken fence posts as if the land itself were reluctant to let go of the memories buried beneath it. The Whitworth estate stood far beyond the last streetlight of Harlow Ridge, a silhouette of rotted timber and collapsed chimneys that loomed like a monument to everything the town wished it could forget. People said the wind never sounded the same near that house, that it carried a thin, trembling whistle that didn't match the direction of the breeze. No one walked the road after dusk, and even at noon, locals kept their eyes down when passing the path leading to the estate, as if acknowledging it might stir whatever still lingered there. I didn't believe any of it, not at first. I had come for research, for documents, for what I assumed was simply another forgotten American tragedy swallowed by time. But the moment I stepped off the bus and saw the way the townspeople stiffened at my questions, I realized the Whitworth name wasn't forgotten, it's avoided. Every whispered warning hinted at something unspeakable, something threaded through the soil and the bones of the land. The old men at the diner refused to meet my gaze, muttering to themselves that some families were better left in the dark. Yet it wasn't their silence that unsettled me most, it was the single phrase repeated by nearly every person I encountered: if you follow the story long enough, it follows you back. I dismissed it as superstition, a remnant of rural ghost lore meant to frighten outsiders. But as night settled over Harlow Ridge and the distant outline of the Whitworth house emerged through the mist, I felt the weight of 100 unspoken memories pressing against the windows of my rented room. Something about that place seemed to breathe, slow and patient, as if waiting for someone foolish enough to look closely. And with every passing hour, I began to understand why no one in town dared speak the Whitworth family's name aloud. The Whitworth estate's isolation was never just a matter of geography, it was a presence that shaped the family's history and the town's fear, a quiet force that pressed in from every direction. The estate sat miles beyond the last fork in the road, where the gravel thinned into dirt and the trees grew so close together that sunlight seemed to hesitate before entering. Travelers who accidentally passed near it always spoke of the same unsettling shift in the air, as if the forest itself tightened its grip around them. This separation from the rest of Harlow Ridge created a world within a world, a pocket of land cut off not only by distance but by an atmosphere that felt heavier, colder, and strangely watchful. Over the years, this remoteness became the perfect barrier between the Whitworth family and anyone who might have questioned their habits, their rumors, or the odd sounds that drifted into the night and carried across the valley. In a place where voices echoed strangely and shadows lingered unnaturally long, it was easy for secrets to thrive. Townspeople often said that the estate looked abandoned even when it was fully inhabited, because no smoke rose from the chimneys unless the weather was bitterly cold, and no lights flickered behind the windows unless absolutely necessary. Many wondered whether the family chose the location because they craved privacy or whether the location itself slowly molded the family into something private, suspicious, and withdrawn. Children who dared each other to approach the boundary fence often returned pale-faced, describing the feeling that they were being watched long before they could even see the house. Hunters who wandered too close claimed the woods fell silent in a way that wasn't natural, as if every creature held its breath until they left. The isolation also meant that the Whitworths rarely ventured into town, and when they did, their visits were brief and unsettlingly quiet, with family members speaking only when spoken to and avoiding eye contact. Their separation created an aura of mystery that, over generations, twisted into superstition. People began to believe the land itself rejected outsiders, that the estate's remoteness wasn't just chosen but imposed, as though something rooted deep in the soil demanded solitude. This belief grew stronger every time a stranger tried to investigate the family's past and left abruptly, unwilling to explain why they couldn't stay another night. By the time the last Whitworth heir vanished, the estate had taken on a life of its own in the minds of the townspeople, a place where silence ruled and where the line between nature and nightmare blurred so completely that no one could say where the real isolation ended and the imagined one began. The vanishing of Eleanor Whitworth in 1894 became the first crack in the facade of a family already wrapped in secrecy, and it marked the beginning of the whispers that would eventually define their legacy. Eleanor had been known as the brightest and most spirited of the Whitworth children, a girl who sometimes dared to wander beyond the estate's boundaries, though always returning before dusk. Her sudden disappearance was not only alarming but deeply puzzling, because it happened on a night when the entire family was supposedly gathered for one of their private household observances, nights the Whitworths never missed or allowed interruption. When Eleanor was discovered missing the following morning, her room appeared untouched, her bed neatly made, and her shoes lined up beside the door as if she had expected to put them on again soon. The only sign that something was wrong was the window, left slightly ajar despite the cold wind that had swept in overnight. The town offered to help search, but the family refused, insisting she had left voluntarily to pursue studies elsewhere, a claim that immediately raised suspicions, as no girl in the region traveled alone, certainly not without luggage or a farewell. Even stranger was the absence of any written records, no acceptance letters, no academic arrangements, no correspondence from Eleanor herself. The townspeople quietly organized their own search anyway, combing the woods and riverbanks around the estate, yet no footprints, clothing, or personal belongings were ever found. The lack of evidence made the disappearance feel less like someone leaving and more like someone being erased. Rumors began to swirl that the Whitworths were trying to hide something, that Eleanor had uncovered a family secret or witnessed something she shouldn't have. Some of the older residents muttered that they had heard screams on the night she vanished, but no one could confirm it. The family's behavior only intensified suspicion, as they never held a funeral, never placed a memorial, and never allowed Eleanor's name to be spoken in their presence. In the years that followed, her absence seemed to seep into the walls of the estate itself, as if the house remembered what the family wanted forgotten. Visitors noted a coldness in the halls where Eleanor once played, and a lingering perfume that would drift unexpectedly into rooms even though no one had entered them. A few claimed to see a young girl's figure watching from the upstairs window long after the house was abandoned, fueling legends that Eleanor never truly left but remained trapped in whatever fate had befallen her. Her disappearance became the town's first real warning that something was deeply wrong behind the Whitworths' carefully maintained silence, and it marked the beginning of a fear that would grow with every generation that followed. The forbidden room in the Whitworth manor became the most unsettling piece of the family's history, a space whose existence was whispered about for years before anyone outside the bloodline ever saw it. Positioned at the far end of the upper hallway, the door was always locked, and family members denied its importance whenever anyone asked. Yet servants recalled that strange noises often seeped through the keyhole, soft thuds, scraping sounds, and sometimes what resembled a faint humming, as if a child were singing behind the walls. When the manor was finally abandoned decades later, curiosity led a small group of townspeople to enter the estate, their lanterns trembling in hand as they explored the rotting interior. The forbidden room was one of the last doors they investigated, and the only one that resisted every attempt to open it until a rusted hinge finally gave way. What they discovered inside was enough to silence even the boldest among them. The room was small and suffocating, with no proper bed or furniture, only a rusted metal frame that suggested restraints once hung from it. The floorboards were scarred with deep grooves, jagged marks that looked disturbingly like claw scratches, as though someone had tried desperately to dig their way out. Children's drawings littered the walls, but they were not the innocent sketches one might expect. Instead, they showed distorted stick figures, eyes too large, limbs too thin, and shapes hovering in corners that resembled people but lacked faces entirely. Some drawings depicted the Whitworth family, identifiable by their clothing, yet always shown with their eyes filled in completely black. The most chilling detail was that many drawings appeared layered, as if multiple hands over multiple years had added to them, each set of markings darker and more frantic than the last. In one corner lay a small wooden toy, its edges worn smooth as if it had been held tightly for hours at a time. The windows had been nailed shut from the outside, trapping the room in perpetual darkness. Dust coated every surface, yet the center of the floor was strangely clean, as if someone or something had moved through it recently despite the house being uninhabited for decades. The group left abruptly, refusing to speak about what they saw, but word leaked slowly through their tremors and unfinished sentences. People began to wonder if this was where Eleanor had been kept before she vanished or if the room had belonged to the silent child born years earlier. Theories spread that the Whitworths had confined someone who wasn't meant to be seen, someone whose presence the family feared yet could not let go. Whatever the truth was, the forbidden room became a symbol of the family's darkest secrets, a physical reminder that behind the estate's silence lay suffering, confinement, and something far more sinister than the town had ever imagined. The Whitworth family's midnight rituals became the most disturbing aspect of their legacy, spoken of only in hushed tones by those who had lived close enough to witness the strange glow of lanterns flickering through the trees on moonless nights. These rituals were never publicly acknowledged, yet journals, fragments of letters, and the recollections of long-dead neighbors painted an unsettling picture of gatherings that took place deep within the estate grounds. The family seemed to wait for nights where the sky offered no guidance, when darkness pressed down heavily and the air felt unnaturally still, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Servants claimed the Whitworths would assemble in the center of the yard, forming a circle with their backs facing outward, as though they were shielding something in the middle. No voices rose in prayer or song, only a low murmur that sounded less like words and more like a rhythmic pulse. Those who dared to listen from the shadows swore they heard a second voice during these rituals, a childlike whisper that didn't quite match human tone or cadence. It would drift across the yard like wind slipping through a cracked window, except the night air remained perfectly still. Some claimed the whisper came from beneath the ground, while others believed it echoed from inside the walls of the house itself. Journals found years later in the estate's library referenced these nights in cryptic lines, describing them as necessary gatherings and noting that the rituals kept the presence calm. The entries never identified what that presence was, only that the family feared its agitation and believed neglecting the rituals would provoke consequences. Even more disturbing were the diagrams found in the margins, circles within circles, drawn in trembling hands, with notes about positioning, timing, and the necessity of silence. The rituals grew more elaborate over time, with indications that livestock went missing on the same nights and that the Whitworths never allowed outsiders near the property after sundown. One letter from a distant relative mentioned a soft tapping heard outside the manor walls during a ritual, followed by frantic scribbles warning never to open the door, no matter how convincingly the tapping resembled a child asking to be let inside. As years passed, the townspeople noticed a pattern. Every ritual night was followed by days where the Whitworths refused to leave the estate, their faces pale, their eyes shadowed, as if the darkness they had summoned had not fully released them. And though no one could say for certain what the family believed they were communing with, the whispers that drifted through the woods, the strange symbols etched on stones near the property line, and the fearful expressions of anyone who observed even a fragment of the ritual made it clear the Whitworths were not simply honoring tradition, they were appeasing something they believed had power over them, something that demanded their devotion in the dead quiet of the night. The birth of the silent child became the turning point when the Whitworth legacy shifted from whispered oddities to something far more unsettling, a moment the town remembered long after the family was gone. According to midwife records and fragmented accounts from frightened servants, the child entered the world without the slightest sound, not a cry of discomfort or breath of shock. At first, this silence was taken as a fragile sign of weakness, and the family prepared themselves for the possibility that the baby might not survive. But the infant's breathing was steady, and its eyes, unnervingly alert for a newborn, followed every movement around the room with an intensity that made even the most seasoned midwife uneasy. The Whitworths, already a family guarded about their affairs, became more secretive than ever once the child was brought home. They refused visitors, dismissed long-serving staff, and kept the baby hidden from the town entirely. Servants who remained whispered that the child seemed to communicate without speaking, responding to voices before words were spoken aloud and turning toward doorways seconds before anyone entered. Some noted that the baby rarely blinked and that its gaze lingered too long, as if studying the world with an understanding far beyond its age. One servant claimed the baby could mimic sounds perfectly, not in the playful way most infants babble, but with eerie precision, repeating a melody or a phrase heard once with flawless accuracy. The Whitworths insisted these accounts were exaggerations, but their strict rules around the child told a different story. They forbade mirrors in the nursery, covered windows with heavy drapes, and insisted the child be kept away from the eastern wing of the house for reasons never explained. The family also began participating in their midnight rituals more consistently, as though the child's presence intensified whatever they believed they were controlling or protecting. Townspeople grew suspicious when the Whitworths stopped attending church and withdrew from all community involvement, choosing instead to isolate themselves completely. Some claimed they saw the family carrying the child outside only during moonless nights, wrapped tightly in a dark cloth that concealed its face. Others spoke of a soft humming sound that drifted from the manor on those nights, a sound unlike any lullaby, melodic yet unsettling, as if the child were singing to something unseen. Over time, rumors spread that the child possessed abilities the family could neither understand nor control, abilities that frightened even the Whitworths themselves. The tragedy grew when the silent child suddenly vanished from all records, with the family claiming the infant had died, though no grave was ever found and no death certificate was ever filed. The mystery surrounding the child's fate became one of the darkest threads in the Whitworth story, leaving the town to wonder whether the family had been protecting the child from the world or protecting the world from the child. The tragedy of Samuel Whitworth marked the moment when the family's quiet strangeness transformed into undeniable terror, a shift that even the most skeptical townspeople could no longer ignore. Samuel had once been regarded as the family's anchor, a stern but level-headed patriarch who kept the estate functioning when the world around them seemed to fray. For years he managed the property, maintained the routines, and handled the few interactions the Whitworths allowed themselves with the town. But as the rituals grew more frequent and the mysteries surrounding the silent child intensified, something inside Samuel began to unravel. Servants noticed the change first. They described him pacing the halls late at night, muttering under his breath in a language no one recognized. He began sleeping in short, restless intervals and often woke with scratches on his arms, claiming he had tried to stop it from getting too close. When pressed on who or what it was, he would fall silent and stare at the walls as though expecting them to answer for him. As weeks passed, Samuel withdrew further from reality, spending nights carving strange symbols all over the manor walls. These symbols matched the diagrams found in the family's journals, but Samuel drew them with increasing urgency, covering door frames, windowsills, and even the floors in a desperate attempt to contain whatever he believed was creeping through the house. Servants would find him crouched in the hallway at dawn, hands stained with charcoal or blood from where he had pressed too hard, tracing the same symbol repeatedly as if reinforcing a barrier only he could sense weakening. His family tried to conceal his decline, insisting he was merely exhausted or ill, but the truth became impossible to hide when Samuel began speaking of voices that called to him from beneath the floorboards. He claimed they belonged to someone he had failed to protect, though he never specified who. At times, he would suddenly freeze mid-sentence, tilt his head as though listening, and then whisper responses to someone no one else could hear. The final break came one stormy evening when a servant found Samuel in the eastern wing, scratching frantically at the plaster, insisting there was a door behind the wall that led to the place where the others are. His hands were raw, nails broken, yet he kept digging until he was dragged away, trembling and incoherent. By the next morning, Samuel was gone. The family claimed he had left voluntarily, needing time away, but no one believed the explanation. Some speculated he fled into the woods, overwhelmed by guilt or fear, while others whispered that whatever Samuel had been trying to contain had finally taken him. All that remained were the symbols he carved throughout the manor, a frantic map of his unraveling mind and a warning carved into every surface that something in that house had driven a once stable man into madness. The town's pact of silence formed gradually, not through any official meeting or declaration, but through a shared understanding that speaking about the Whitworth family seemed to invite misfortune. At first, people merely avoided the topic out of discomfort, convinced that the family's tragedies were the result of internal troubles best left alone. But as the years passed and more unexplained events occurred, strange lights flickering in the woods, livestock found mutilated near the estate's boundary, sudden illnesses afflicting those who ventured too close, the avoidance hardened into something closer to fear. Neighbors who once shrugged off the Whitworths as eccentric began to warn their children never to wander near the property, and adults lowered their voices whenever the family's name slipped into conversation, glancing over their shoulders as though the trees themselves might be listening. The turning point that sealed the silent agreement came after a series of deaths that locals could not explain. A hunter went missing near the estate's creek and was later found drained of life, his expression twisted in a terror no one could interpret. A schoolteacher who had been researching the Whitworth genealogy fell ill with a fever that no doctor could diagnose, muttering the family's names in delirium until she passed. A pair of travelers who camped too close to the property reported waking to the sound of hushed voices surrounding their tent, though no footprints were found except their own. Each event was isolated enough for the town to rationalize, but together they formed a pattern too disturbing to ignore. The more people discussed the family, the more these incidents seemed to occur, as if even the act of speaking their name stirred something restless on the estate. Over time, a superstition took hold that the Whitworths' misfortune was contagious, not in a physical sense, but in a way that burdened anyone who became too curious. Those who asked too many questions were said to suffer bad luck, sudden accidents, or sleepless nights filled with sounds that resembled tapping on windows or soft humming in the dark. Parents began to scold their children not just for wandering near the property but for saying the name aloud, claiming it carried an echo that traveled farther than intended. Eventually, silence became the town's collective shield, a way to avoid becoming entangled in whatever curse or madness seemed to cling to the Whitworth legacy. This unspoken rule persisted even after the estate fell into ruin and the family line appeared to die out. Travelers who stopped in Harlow Ridge noticed that locals would tense at the mere mention of the old manor, offering vague warnings or abruptly changing the subject. The pact was never written down, never formally agreed upon, but it lived in every conversation that abruptly ended and every story left deliberately unfinished, a testament to the lingering fear that the Whitworths' darkness might still be listening, ready to stir if their name was spoken too boldly. The discovery of the sealed basement became the most definitive proof that the Whitworth family had hidden something far darker than rumors ever suggested, and it marked the moment when myth began to harden into undeniable reality. For decades, townspeople believed the manor had been fully explored after the family vanished, but the truth emerged only when a group of preservation volunteers attempted to stabilize the collapsing structure. While inspecting the foundation, they noticed a section of the brick wall that seemed newer than the rest, its mortar brighter and its alignment slightly uneven. At first they assumed it was a repair from long ago, but the more they examined it, the more it resembled an intentional barrier meant to conceal rather than protect. When the bricks were finally removed, a blast of cold, stale air escaped the hidden void, carrying with it the scent of old earth and something metallic, like rust or dried blood. The lanterns revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness, the wood creaking underfoot as though protesting the intrusion after so many silent years. At the bottom, the volunteers found a room that looked untouched by time, preserved with a precision that felt deliberate and unnervingly careful. Shelves lined the walls, each one holding glass jars sealed tightly with wax. Inside the jars were objects that at first appeared mundane: locks of hair wrapped in cloth, fragments of clothing, small toys, tarnished rings, and pages of letters so faded they were unreadable. But the deeper they explored, the clearer it became that each jar corresponded to a missing member of the Whitworth family. A ribbon matching photographs of Eleanor's hair, a wooden block engraved with initials belonging to the silent child, a cracked pocket watch associated with Samuel. It was as if the basement had been curated as a grim museum, preserving the last remnants of those who disappeared. More disturbing were the markings on the walls, symbols similar to what Samuel had carved upstairs, drawn here with far more precision. They formed a circle around the center of the floor, where a large, rust-darkened stain stretched across the stone. Some believed it was the residue of old water damage, but others whispered it looked far too organic. At the far end of the basement was a smaller chamber, sealed with rotting boards. Inside, the air felt heavier, oppressive in a way that made breathing difficult. Here they found a single chair bolted to the ground, its restraints frayed but still intact. Scratches marred the stone around it, radiating outward like desperate attempts to escape. No bodies were found, yet the evidence suggested these items were not memorials but trophies or tokens collected during the family's darkest moments. The volunteers left the basement shaken, unable to agree on whether the room had been used for ritual, confinement, or something even more sinister. But one thing became painfully clear: the Whitworth family had not simply vanished, they had been carefully erased, their final traces hidden beneath layers of stone and silence. The arrival of the surviving heir marked the moment when the long-dormant fear surrounding the Whitworth estate awoke once more, stirring memories the town had worked generations to bury. For decades, the family line was believed to have ended abruptly, with no descendants left to inherit the cursed land or its grim history. So when a stranger arrived claiming Whitworth blood, the townspeople reacted with a mixture of disbelief and dread. The heir, a quiet figure with an unsettling familiarity in their features, appeared in Harlow Ridge without warning, carrying a worn leather satchel and an old deed to the estate. They spoke little about their past, saying only that they had been called back, a phrase that sent chills through those who remembered the family's whispered rituals. What unsettled the town even more was the heir's uncanny knowledge of the estate's layout, despite claiming never to have set foot in Harlow Ridge before. They navigated the overgrown path as though guided by memory, pausing at specific spots as if hearing echoes from the past. Some witnesses said the air touched trees and stones with a strange familiarity, whispering under their breath as though greeting something unseen. When they finally reached the manor, the townspeople watched from a distance as the heir stood before the decaying structure, not with hesitation but with a grim recognition, as if they had always known this moment would come. Their presence triggered a series of unsettling disturbances. Lights flickered in nearby homes despite clear weather. Dogs howled at the empty road stretching toward the estate. A low hum, reminiscent of the eerie sound associated with the silent child, drifted through the woods on nights when no wind blew. Rumors spread quickly that the heir intended to restore the manor or uncover the truth that the family had tried to bury. More superstitious residents warned that the land itself would reject such efforts, insisting the estate had been sealed by forces beyond human control. Yet the heir returned to the house each day, prying open boarded rooms, retrieving objects with deliberate care, and taking long pauses in the hall where Samuel had carved his final symbols. Some people in town insisted the heir's presence brought an unshakable sense of déjà vu, as if a fragment of the Whitworth's darkness had stepped out of history and back into the present. Others claimed the heir bore a resemblance to the family's old portraits, especially the silent child, though no one dared to publicly make the comparison. As days passed, the heir's behavior grew stranger. They were seen wandering the woods near midnight, stopping at spots tied to old rumors, whispering to the heir as though listening for a response. The more time they spent at the estate, the more palpable the sense of unease became, almost as if the land recognized the bloodline returning to it. And in the deep hours of night, townspeople swore they saw a lantern moving through the manor's upper floor, followed by a second, fainter glow, as though someone or something had welcomed the heir home. Here is *** key point number 10 explained in 450 words, without any subheadings or ending sentence ***. The final key point emphasizes how the lingering effects of generational secrecy can shape the identities, choices, and emotional landscapes of people who grow up under the weight of untold stories. When families hide painful truths, whether about ancestry, relationships, or scandals, the silence itself becomes a powerful teacher. Children learn early that certain questions must never be asked, certain memories must remain untouched, and certain behaviors must be justified without explanation. Over time, this creates a psychological maze where individuals struggle to understand who they truly are because major parts of their family history have been deliberately erased or distorted. The consequences of this silence often surface unexpectedly, especially when a long-hidden truth finally comes to light. Discovering that one's family has concealed critical details can trigger a range of emotions, from betrayal and confusion to anger and grief. People begin questioning every memory, every interaction, and every story they once believed. The foundation of their identity suddenly feels cracked, as if the person they thought they were was built on incomplete or manipulated information. This emotional upheaval doesn't affect only the person who uncovers the truth, it ripples outward to siblings, partners, and even children who sense the shift in the family dynamic. Trust becomes fragile, conversations become cautious, and relationships require extra care to rebuild stability. Yet, despite the pain, this revelation can also become a turning point. When hidden truths finally emerge, they offer a chance to break long-standing cycles of silence and secrecy. Individuals often find themselves compelled to confront not only the truth but also the patterns that enabled it to remain hidden for so long. Some choose to approach the older generation, seeking answers or clarity, while others step back, preferring to examine the truth privately before engaging with the family. This process can lead to healthier communication patterns as new generations vow not to repeat the mistakes of those before them. Another significant aspect of this key point is the way truth reshapes self-perception. For many, understanding the full picture finally allows them to make sense of lifelong feelings of discomfort, confusion, or emotional disconnection. They begin to see how their behaviors, whether trust issues, fear of commitment, or a tendency to withdraw, were influenced by hidden family tension rather than personal flaws. This awareness can empower them to rebuild their sense of self from a more honest and grounded place. Ultimately, The uncovering of generational secrecy marks the beginning of a profound internal shift. It challenges individuals to rebuild their identity with clarity, to forgive where possible, and to let go where necessary, all while carrying forward the lessons that truth, no matter how painful, is always more liberating than silence.